All right, so today we are talking social studies, and we are going to be talking about trigger events or events that helped lead us to the Civil War. So you got a paper in your bag that says events leading to the Civil War, expert group, and then on the other side, side B, it says jigsaw group. So we're actually only going to fill out side B, okay? The one that says jigsaw group. So I'm going to read you 5 different articles, and then we are going to write for each one what happened and why was it important, okay? So let's start with the Compromise of 1850. Okay, the North and South both received victories and a civil war is avoided. The summer was a busy and contentious one for Congress. Faced with admitting California into the Union, senators argued over whether California should be a free state or a slave state. Henry Clay, a senator from Kentucky, drafted a compromise with both Northern and Southern victories. The Compromise of 1850, a package of 5 laws, was passed this September. Northerners are pleased because California was admitted as a free state. Although Southerners lost California, they are contented that the Union gained 2 territories with no slavery restrictions, Utah and New Mexico. As part of the deal, the slave trade is now prohibited in D.C., but slave holding is still allowed there. In addition, Texas surrendered some of its territory to New Mexico and received $10 million. Finally, and most importantly for Southerners, a fugitive slave law was passed. This law requires Northerners to find people who have run away from slavery and return them to their enslavers. Northerners are outraged and claim the law is unfair. Although each side agrees the plan is far from perfect, the country can breathe a sigh of relief. We have avoided a civil war. So, for number 1 in Compromise of 1850, it asks us what happened. And it wants us to give a brief description. So let me just pull this out here because this is going to help us. All right, so what it is that happened is Southerners wanted the West to open slavery while Northerners did not. Congress created a compromise, 5 laws with both Northern and Southern victories. Why is it important? This law appeased both sides and prevented, at least for the time, a civil war. So you can see here, this top box. So if you need to, you can go ahead and pause it right here and fill in those answers. All right, so if you didn't pause it, make sure you do so you can fill them in. The next event, the next trigger event, was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And this was a big deal, so make sure you're paying attention to what I'm reading to you here. The most popular novel of our day, 300,000 copies were sold, which was a lot for back then. Author Harriet Beecher Stowe has created a sensation. Her anti-slavery novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, is a bestseller. It tells the fictional story of Uncle Tom, a noble and long-suffering enslaved person. He interacts with several characters, including Eva, a white girl whom he befriends, and Elsa, a woman who escaped slavery with her 5-year-old son. Even under the worst conditions, Uncle Tom remains good and faithful. The novel's bad guy is Simon Legree, a cruel and greedy enslaver who hates Uncle Tom. Stowe's book is clearly arguing that slavery is morally evil. Abolitionists praise the book. Uncle Tom's Cabin has convinced some people, especially Northerners, that slavery must be ended. On the other hand, Southerners are outraged. Slavery supporters say the book is slanderous, false, and criminal. Surely no one expected such anger and discord from one book. So why was this important? Or let's first talk, what happened? Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a novel meant to convince readers that slavery is evil. Why was this important? The book increased tension between the North and the South. In addition, it convinced some that slavery should be ended. So Uncle Tom's Cabin is this one by where my fingers are. So you need to write that in your next box. So go ahead and pause it right here so you can fill that in. All right, so our next event is Bleeding Kansas. Let me turn to our news article here. The conflict in Kansas between anti-slavery and pro-slavery settlers has become a war. In 1854, a law called the Kansas-Nebraska Act overruled the Missouri Compromise, which declared that northern states would be free and southern states would be slave. This new law allows the residents of Kansas and Nebraska to vote on if slavery will be legal or not. This law prompted about 1,000 New Englanders to travel to Kansas. These anti-slavery settlers hoped to secure the territories as free. However, thousands more came from the South to vote for slavery. When the votes were tallied, Kansas was declared a slave territory. The anti-slavery settlers were outraged and decided to set up their own legislature. The pro-slavery settlers had also set up a legislature. Kansas actually had two governments, both outlawing the other. So what happened is that they decided that Kansas could decide whether or not it would be a slavery state. They could vote. So a bunch of people from the North came down and they voted against slavery. But the South was like, we can do that too. So a bunch of people came up from the South and they voted for slavery. And when they counted up all the votes, the for slavery people won. So Kansas became a pro-state. But that made them mad. So the anti-slavery people decided, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to make our own government and we can decide. And the South, the pro-slavery people said, well, if you're going to make a government, we're going to make a government and we're going to say slavery is allowed. So we can have slavery, we can't have slavery. Two governments contradicting each other, saying that each side is illegal. That doesn't really make sense, right? Something's going to happen. Let's find out. Violence erupted on both sides. Dozens were tarred and feathered, kidnapped and killed. Last May, a group of pro-slavery men, so this is talking like it was currently happening. So when they say last May, they're still talking the 1900s. This is actually 1856. Last May, a group of pro-slavery men entered Lawrence, Kansas, where they ransacked and burned homes and stores. In retaliation, an abolitionist named John Brown led a group to Pontawattamie Creek to kill 5 pro-slavery men. Governor John W. Geary restored order this month. In all, 55 people were killed in the conflict called Bleeding Kansas. Is the violence in Kansas representative of the turmoil facing our country? Can the United States remain united? All right, so what happened? A new law allowed Kansas residents to vote on if slavery would be legal in the territory. Violence erupted between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. Why was this important? Because the conflict in Kansas was representative of the turmoil facing the country, right? It was showing this is what's going on in the country. It might be happening right here in Kansas right now, but it's affecting the whole country. The violence foreshadowed or told us a civil war was coming. Okay, so Bleeding Kansas, right here where my fingers are. Go ahead and pause the film so you can get this filled in, because you will be turning this worksheet in. So our next one is Dred Scott v. Sandford. So this was a court case that happened. The U.S. Supreme Court declares Black Americans are not citizens. Dred Scott versus Sandford. The recent Supreme Court decision, Dred Scott versus Sandford, has everyone talking. Dred Scott is an enslaved man who was sold to Dr. John Emerson in 1830. Emerson took Scott from Missouri, a slave state, to Illinois and Wisconsin territories, areas where slavery is illegal. After several years, Dr. Emerson moved Scott and his family back to Missouri. When Emerson died, the people he enslaved were willed to his wife Elsa Irene Sandford. In 1846, the Scott family tried to buy their freedom, but Irene Sandford refused. Dred Scott then sued Emerson for his freedom, claiming that since he had lived in free territories, he should be free. The case was appealed until it reached the Supreme Court. In a landmark decision, the court declared that Black Americans are not citizens. Chief Justice R.B. Taney argued that Dred Scott did not have a right to sue in court since he was not a citizen. He went on to declare that it was illegal for Congress to ban slavery in the Western territories. Some northern newspapers have criticized the court's decision as part of a plot to expand slavery. Abolitionist groups say that the decision goes against liberty and the idea that all men are created equal. Supporters of slavery celebrate the court's opinion. Despite the Supreme Court ruling, it seems the matter of slavery is far from settled. All right, so let's summarize what happened with the Dred Scott case. The Supreme Court ruled that Black Americans are not citizens and that slavery in the territories cannot be outlawed by Congress. So they said that Congress can't decide if slavery is illegal or not. And Black people can't sue. They're not citizens, which we now know is wrong, right? But we learn from our mistakes. So why is this important? Northerners were angered by the decision while Southerners celebrated it. Despite the ruling, it seemed that the matter of slavery was not settled. So right here where my fingers are, go ahead and fill in your box. Pause the video if you need to. And let's do our last one. John Brown's raid. All right. So John Brown raids Ferry. Brown and his men take hostages and fail to start a slave uprising. On the evening of October 16, 1859, John Brown, an abolitionist, led a group of 18 men to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to seize guns from the arsenal, arm the local enslaved population, and begin a rebellion against slavery. He successfully raided the arsenal and sent men to distribute weapons to enslaved people nearby. He also captured several hostages. Then Brown waited for hundreds of enslaved people to join his cause. They did not come. Instead, Brown was bombarded with gunfire from local citizens and the town militia. 2 locals and 10 of Brown's men were killed. The militia cut off all escape routes. By early afternoon of the next day, federal troops from Washington arrived and arrested Brown. John Brown was tried and hanged on December 2nd. During his short trial, he defended his action as Christian and just. Some abolitionists celebrated Brown's attempt to start a rebellion against slavery. Pro-slavery Southerners are outraged and feel that their lives and property were threatened. A storm of anger and hate sets the stage for the upcoming 1860 presidential election. Some Southerners have sworn that they will never vote for a Northern, especially not Abraham Lincoln, whom they view as a John Brown sympathizer. All right, so what happened? John Brown and his followers tried to start a rebellion against slavery at Harper's Ferry. He was tried and hung. Why is this important? This event increased anger and misunderstanding between the North and South and set the stage for the 1860 election. There you go. Go ahead and you can pause it there. So next week we're going to talk about the 1860 election and how that set it into motion for the Southern states to succeed or leave from the Union, which is what starts the Civil War. So make sure you have that paper all filled out, and it needs to be turned in Monday, the 10th. All right, thanks, guys.